Good morning, good afternoon, LinkedIn friends, HubSpot Nation. Welcome to another edition of Let's Build Your Audience with Mr. Oaks. How you doing, man?
I am doing well. How are you?
I am doing well. Excited to get a little more practical today uh, as we begin this deep dive series that we introduced last month.
Yes, I hope they're all practical. And there's going to be, because there's so much to this, there's going to be a lot of strategy mixed in with some examples. But um, we've got, uh, this is one of the exciting ones when I'm doing marketing advising with clients, indirect competitors, doing a deep dive on both identifying and how to use the identified indirect competitors, as well as working it into all the places in the customer journey that it could live. Is a fun and interesting challenge, and I find, and I hope our audience here viewing it does, that it really it opens a lot of doors and opportunity on for the entire customer journey, and gives you new ways for thinking about their needs from the prospect stage to the customer stage and into, depending on your model, like renewal retention. And it's one that we kind of assume that we're doing okay, assume that that is fine, and a lot of times when you dig in, discover that there's a lot more here than we thought, and some of the getting some of this really uh, technically simple infrastructure in HubSpot really opens the doors for like leveraging this to win more customers and make them more successful. So it's always, I find it really fun working on challenges like this.
Yeah. No, I think it's especially if you're a consultant or coach or helping people trying to like transform the business or improve um in at any point in the process really, like finding these moments that create kind of the wow factor of, oh wow, I we weren't even considering that. Like if you can get that reaction, it's like, okay, like there's a one up, like I've
Yes.
delivered unique insight, and now any preconceived notion, it like gets shattered about how things should or would or could be. Um, and when we say things like, "Oh, there's always a process, it just might not be documented," or "There's always a CRM at the end of the day," and that's one of my favorite
Yeah.
ones recently. It just happens to be like Outlook most of the
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it definitely helps reposition the story when you can find these things that really are the eye openers.
Yeah. And, my when I'm doing marketing advising, it's I call it S2P2. It's strategy, systems, process, people, and this kind of thing touches all of them to some degree. But when working with clients, the people aspect is, I find it gratifying, good for the business, good for the folks that we're working directly with, to give them tactical skills. You can learn anywhere, but helping them, giving them a new facet, a new dimension to look at their challenges and opportunities with, that expands their ability to serve customers and makes them more effective. In my case, marketers, um, uh, is like a win-win for everybody, for the org, for the individuals, for me. Um, so it's
Yeah.
great.
And I'll never forget, like I think the first time it really hit home for me was listening my first listen of uh is it The Innovator's Dilemma? Um Clay Christensen,
Yeah,
Jobs to Be Done,
it could have been
right?
Innovator's Solution. That book is a little more tactical. if you've
Okay.
read that one. And if you haven't, I would just skip to Inver Solution. Anybody out there?
Yeah. Um, they talked about the mattress like story of like if you're trying to sell somebody a mattress, like what they found out is a lot of times the thing that gets in the way of that is people don't want to put their dirty mattress like out. They don't want to put it out in the open. It's a
Yeah.
hassle just to get rid of it. So these companies that came in were trying to go direct to consumer, like had to come up with the solution to take the mattress and make it easier. And that was the competition in many ways. It wasn't the mattress store, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the let's. I'm gonna share my slides and then skip one because we might as well jump right into what indirect competitors are. This is our flow. You know, we customer journey. We learn about the customer and then we apply it better. So let's jump to talk about indirect competitors. The um, in if you go to business school, you might read about this called it's a very similar concept. It's not a complete overlap, but they will often call asymmetric competitors. But when we're talking about identifying prospects and customers, building them as segmented audiences in HubSpot so that we can communicate more effectively with them and serve them better. Um, what indirect competitors are is a view into how those prospects see their challenges, what the potential solutions are. In their world, you're one of many, probably. Um, and you only know about some of those. Your direct competitors, you know, if you were to say, if you just pick a product and say who is the direct competitor for Slack, right? It's Teams, it's maybe kind of Discord, it's any of the like business chat platforms, but they happen to already know that they are actually competing with email and SMS and WhatsApp and disunified communication channels, right? Um, an indirect competitor is, you know, your name direct competitors that you have battle cards for and you have comparisons for on your website. Those are the folks that you identify with looking at your business and at your sales process from inside the jar. You've identified like, oh yeah, people do a direct comparison of us to this competitor, and we can build a feature matrix that says why we're better or whatever. And your pricing is probably exactly the same. Um, Indirect competitors uh, are the things that your prospects believe can solve their problem, but usually in a radically different way. But they view them as a viable alternative to you, and so you can often guess what some of those could be. Like if you're, let's choose another example. A personal trainer is a good example of like a high touch, high ticket sale that's also high value. And you might think like, okay, well, how do I price myself if I'm a personal trainer against other personal trainers? What's their rate? What are the packages? But you're probably being compared to Apple Fitness Plus and YouTube exercise videos and a gym membership or group classes or buying a rowing machine or a treadmill, buying a weight bench, uh, just joining a local, like in Nashville, maybe these happen in other places. They have running clubs where you just get out and run together as a group. Those are all things that can carve into the personal trainer purchase decision in dollars and maybe are exclusive, maybe not. But when a prospect is thinking about reaching a fitness goal, reaching a future where they have achieved a different self, uh, those are all indirect competitors to personal trainer, right? So if you are trying to acquire that customer, you need to be able to think that way and make that part of your marketing and sales process so that you can serve them better. The um, prospects always see these, and you typically inside, again, know about a couple, but you're absolutely missing some of them. And to the degree that you are always underserving your customers, right? Like if somebody gets in the pipeline and you uh, don't know what this indirect competitor on their mind is, and you lose them, you lose the deal. Um, if you don't know that indirect competitor and why the closed lost reason, um, then it just like looks like, oh, they chose somebody else, and not they were looking at the problem in a different way. Um, and so anyway, the other facet of this, once somebody becomes a customer, if you close one, uh, or I guess maybe I'll say, you're also underserving the indirect competitors, shoppers who you, even if you win the deal, because it means you're winning that business in spite of the fact that you're not doing a good job here, right? So if you know that there is a segment that is comparing you to something um, that isn't obvious and that your competitors don't know about, you have an audience that you can go find and reach out to and serve effectively, that other people haven't tapped into, right? And so it's like, instead of accidentally closing 10% or 15% of your deals that are indirect competitors and not really trying, you can grow that slice of the pie without sacrificing, that's not a zero sum game. That's, growing the total opportunity. Um, and you, as this says, you definitely have indirect competitors. And the sneaky thing about it is you are also somebody else's indirect competitor, and you can discover that by asking your prospects and customers as well.
Yeah. And I started putting some pieces together myself, talking to Tony yesterday about HubSpot adoption. So even if you're still looking for more information here, like what Josh just described is you sold HubSpot, but you didn't identify the indirect competitor of the spreadsheet or the Outlook that the sales team uses.
Or the LinkedIn, every salesperson's LinkedIn DMs, right? Like all
Yeah.
of these different things.
And so
Yep.
when you don't address that, you don't bring it into HubSpot or whatever, they don't use HubSpot, right? And
Yeah.
we all know about those problems. So we're trying to help you out with that.
Yep.
Things just like that.
Yep. The It's not surprising, but as we step through a flow here that we're going to look at, you will see that you touched on an example there of how we use this in like onboarding and success. That's the um, as I commonly say, spreadsheets are version one of everything, right? The first computerized shopping list, grocery list was a spreadsheet. The first project management system was a spreadsheet that had been adapted for these needs. The first CRM was a spreadsheet that had been adapted for these needs. Um, if you have a software or technology product, it is, you know, I would put $100 down that one of your indirect competitors is a spreadsheet or something extremely like it. Somebody might come in via Airtable or Notion or something like that as well, but a spreadsheet is almost certainly an indirect competitor. And again, identifying that, not just like, oh, you're using spreadsheets now, so now I have some pointed questions I can ask in the sales process to try to poke your pain points. Sure, that's part of this, but also being able to identify, like, okay, uh, in a system like HubSpot, the number of just banana spreadsheets that I've seen that clients use that we have to replicate or model or produce similar outcomes for, is that the number of those is huge. Um, Usually we can do it. But if you, again, like saying, what's your process is one thing. Saying, well, how were you doing this before? How would you do it if you hadn't been given the mandate, in this case, like to do it in HubSpot? And then that's when they will pull up their spreadsheet that like requires, to 43-inch monitors to display. And like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Like we understand uh, how you see this differently, right? And we can bring it
Yeah.
together.
Sometimes I'll just go straight to the point and be like, "So what spreadsheets do you use to support your job?"
Yeah,
I'll just get you right.
yeah,
Oh, okay, this is where we're at.
yeah.
I did realize last week, like, talking to a client, like, sometimes it's not even they like the the spreadsheet or but in this case, like, there's whiteboards, there's any kind of visual things
Hmm.
where somebody else is holding them accountable, especially as you start to go across teams.
Yes,
Like, they might
or
want
up
to, right?
in the
They might
future.
want to just sprint into HubSpot, but if the other person's not going to look at HubSpot to hold them accountable, they cannot like go use HubSpot or go use the new thing.
Yes. Yeah. And we'll touch on, we don't have time for it today, but we'll touch on how this can also inform product development decisions. But, spreadsheets are both so powerful and insidious when you're trying to normalize operations because they have just a little bit of extra arbitrary functionality that enable it to do something like this, like to go a little bit deeper on the illustration, for the conversation here is like the if somebody's using a spreadsheet, uh, or maybe let's come at it from a different angle. The number one clue that somebody has a massive spreadsheet that they haven't shared with you or mentioned, or that they are struggling to migrate away from, is if they spend all of their time in an index page view table in HubSpot, right? So if like their deal view is not in stages, it's in a table filtered for theirs, um, or a custom object view, or in Service Hub, same thing, uh, because they are used to seeing a table, clicking in, editing the status of that. Whatever it's a record of, editing the status of that project, and then it's updated, and then they color the cell red so that when they do their weekly one-on-one, they review and say like this one's at risk because it's red, right? Um, the those are the you know those are the clues that you have like a different way of thinking about the problem and the goal that they are trying to reach, right?
Yeah.
Um, all right. So
So how do
so
we
yeah,
get there?
good. Yeah. How we get there? Good question. That's the next slide. Um, if I can share the right screen, is you have to learn from your customers what those indirect competitors are, and fortunately, it's a virtuous circle. Um, Starting with typically ask prospects, you kind of know, probably, or you probably have a good guess about what some of them are. Again, if you're in software, like just ask, would you use spreadsheets for this? You may have heard some in sales conversations, or in reviews, or in CSAT, or things like that. You ask prospects, you use what you learn to win more customers, you serve those customers better. You ask customers, this is where you identify who you are an indirect competitor for, so you can expand there. You use that to find more prospects, and you keep asking those prospects who the indirect competitors are. Not, you know, a terribly complicated um, process
Very
conceptually,
straightforward.
right? Um, we're going to build an overall sort of flow for how you do this. Um,
Can you
I'm going to
zoom
have to
in a little bit?
I am going to
Yeah,
have
there
to
we go.
zoom in here. Whoops, there we go. So the way that you start by asking prospects who their indirect competitors are is like an inquiry form, some kind of touch in the if you use awareness, consideration, etc. In the awareness stage, just ask somebody, "Hey, are you considering one of these options?" Um, and collect that on their contact record, whether that's like a direct raising your hand to be engaged by sales, or it's some kind of downloadable or whatever. Like, people, I can tell you from experience, people will answer this question. Not everybody will, particularly if you can tie it to an experience um, that is contextual, right? If you know that spreadsheets are a challenge, um, figure out a way to offer value, and in the context of that conversion experience, just say like, "Hey, are you using spreadsheets to do this right now?" Let me share. It's not rocket science, but let's look at a form. So, uh, so here's a a simple example form um, that is this is just the HubSpot preview, but the way that I do this and that I have observed as effective is present simple explanations of your hypothesized direct competitors, either specifically or categorically, which means, like, how would you do this if you didn't use our solution? Oh, I'm going to stick with my spreadsheets. Great, right? Like that's enough. Some of these are other categorical, like I'm shopping you against an enterprise BI tool, even though, we don't think of ourselves as enterprise, we're mid-market or whatever, right? Um, Specifically on these forms, uh, making this is a contact property, and it is a checkbox property because the reduced friction of putting this in front of somebody who isn't deeply kind of engaged in a process with you makes it much more likely that they are going to, kind of uh, as I say, throw you a bone and click one of these check boxes, right? It's particularly make the language very friendly is what I try to aim for, so that um, they and again providing it, asking it within the context where you are trying to demonstrably provide a huge amount of value for this input, right? Like if it's on a blog post or a call action out of an email or something that's like, oh, you came here because you are looking for a how do I do X, you know, answer. And so we're just checking in on this. And it's this, how do I do this with spreadsheets or whatever, or which spreadsheet is best for, X or Y. This is simple, right? We aren't um, doing anything super complicated, and it's not presented in a way, or we aren't asking questions that tend to introduce friction that people love to use or try to use for like scoring and qualifications, right? Do not ask this when you're also asking company size or industry or whatever, where it is clear that or suggests to the prospect that what you are trying to do is figure out whether somebody should call them within 3 minutes, right, of submitting this form. Um, Super simple, not complicated. Um,
Lead scoring. Anyone?
yeah, the which lead scoring is good, but you know do it
As long
right,
as I don't, to your point, as long as I don't feel like I'm being scored in that
right,
moment.
right, and maybe we will score on it eventually, but our step one is uh, ask in a context where we are uh, delivering more value than we are collecting, and store that in the contact record, right? It's not rocket science. So if somebody, spreadsheets is common, but it's a hard example to process in other contexts. But we have stored on their contact record uh, what the indirect competitor is that they're considering. So what do we want to do with that? I guess I have to go back to 100% and so quarter page down. Let's get my paging working here. Um, so if we have, in the same way that we might segment, I think it's generally a bad idea, but you might segment by industry company size. Um, we also want to segment those prospects who are kind of pre-opportunity by the indirect competitor. And I see I have a typo. That middle box should be indirect competitor B. Um, segment by using dynamic lists. Like here's our life cycle stage lead contacts. Right, not not hard to do. So what we want to do is instead of sending all those people the same email that links to the same landing page or enroll them in the same sequence, we know how they are thinking about their problem, and we know, um, uh, hopefully, we have thought about um, the pros and cons of the approach that they are considering so we can speak to them specifically about that, right? So what we want to do is use that information to tailor the sales and marketing communications that those folks receive from us. So they don't get just generic messages. They get one that says, if you're considering an enterprise, we'll move on to a different example shortly. But if you're considering an enterprise BI tool, here's why that's great. Here's why we're great. Let's talk about those differences, right? So all of there's a lot of ways that we can use that in HubSpot, but the simple ones are smart content in the first email they receive. It takes them to subsequent conversion touch points like landing pages with smart content tailored for them. We send them to the right landing page with the right messaging based on that indirect competitor that they're considering. We can even, if we're on CMS Hub for the whole website, we can tailor website pages to them, and which in a minute we will generate an opportunity from this prospect, and we can tailor or suggest the playbook for the SDR or the rep who is or AM who is going to work that deal based on uh, what we know, who we know our indirect uh, competitor in that deal is. The
And
and
within
there's
that, like,
Go ahead.
some orgs, especially bigger ones, like it's getting routed to completely different teams,
Yes.
depending on some of these answers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, when your sales team gets that big and you start to have teams that focus on, often they're divided by region or industry or size. Um, the uh, this is a dimension that if you see this, you know, uh, the I guess I'm not sure how common this pattern is, but I have occasionally noticed that um, large organizations, particularly anybody who purchases with any kind of RFP, indirect competitors exist, but are kind of not allowed at the table. So you know, if you're selling to Oracle or whatever, indirect competitors might be a sales conversation and not a marketing conversation. But but if you are going into new markets, new product areas, you are going to have a much higher prevalence of indirect competitors. So in a large sales organization, that might often mean um, your product led teams, right, who are calling people and emailing people who have done a free trial or a demo or sign up for your service, but with an at company name email address, right? Those smaller entryways into a bigger ticket purchase, there's going to be a ton of indirect competitors right there because particularly product led, right? Like they're going to hear about 5 products and they're going to demo them all, and then they're going to try to make a business case to buy one of them, right? So the people who are doing product led sales within a larger organization, they need a ton of support on indirect competitors, right? Like those are not give them the battle cards, for the giant alternatives, sure, but where they really need your support is with the indirect competitors, because in scenarios like that, I guarantee you that they are demoing something else, right? All right. So, we have hopefully by messaging effectively, right? Instead of just sending like, "Hey, our product does X, and like you probably need X," we have been able to say, "Our product does X, which you need, and but you are thinking about it as Y. So let's talk about whether that's a good fit or a bad, or how we can bring you into the fold. And if we generate an opportunity, then we absolutely need to make sure that when we create a deal in within HubSpot, this is how I would do it: generate a deal, whether systematically or manually. We make sure that that deal passes that or receives that context, right? That in the same way that we stored the indirect competitor on the contact, we need to store that uh, indirect competitor on the deal, along with, talk about it another time, but direct competitors as well, um, for future analysis. And so that when the, when a rapper in AM is working the deal, uh, one of their 100 deals in their pipeline, they have at a glance access to, oh right, they were thinking about this this other possible solution. You can also, obviously, another way to get at the ones that you're missing is do some AI driven analysis of your call transcripts, either as, depending on your tool, run it independently and say have the AI analyze the transcripts for in place or prospective solutions that the prospects were using that do not have our feature set, and so on. Um, you can do that analysis against your historical deals to identify new um, or existing, I should say unknown rather than new, um, indirect competitors, and use that to add those as options on the form where you're asking for them. But also, you're going to want to analyze your call recordings on your deals with indirect competitors to figure out what you're doing and saying that is landing, and how the kinds of questions, objections, and traps that they bring up, right? Like if um, again, the enterprise BI is kind of not a super friendly, accessible example, but what are the people who are shopping that exact indirect competitor against us? Uh, what are we missing? What are they asking that we need to get in front of? But if somebody's surfacing an objection in sales, uh, I generally believe that marketing has done an insufficient job of communicating with that prospect, right? Like, what are those things that get introduced at that point so that we can be more effective?
Yeah.
Um,
This is
so,
commonly the source of misalignment, like across the sales team, um, especially with new versus veteran, salespeople. That these moments, and what comes to mind as you describe this, like, because it goes both ways, and this is why you bring them both together in the deal so that we can see direct and indirect. Because direct is so often like, oh, we have this spec and they don't,
yeah,
right? Um, but so often the indirect is the regulatory standard or something in the background that it's like, oh, I might love your product, but it's not allowed in
right.
this space because I'm
That's a
in,
common one.
right? Because I'm in healthcare and I'm at a hospital, or I'm in a scrapyard. I don't have those regulations. So I'll take this one all day, but now it's, I don't need all of the, bells and whistles uh, and so the tenured salespeople and why the call recordings and AI think is going to help so many. There's an opportunity to help so many companies with this. Like these are the kind of moments where your best salespeople just get the job done because they are so good because they've got so much experience at navigating these conversations like in the moment and just just helping the prospect say like, oh, that's not going to be a big deal, right? Or I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm bringing in this expert. He's done 20 of these that have this exact same issue that you have, and there's going to be no problem here, right?
Yeah, another really common mode that brings indirect competitors into a sales conversation um, is needing or having a use case that can be 80% solved with a lot of different tooling, but that 20% is complex uh, or requires something that a tool doesn't offer, and so those kinds of solutions tend to get solved with invisible costs, with soft costs, right? So it's like, I mean, you know, probably probably 3 times this week, and I don't know, 10 times last week. Probably, I would say the average is between 10 and between like maybe 7 and 15 times a week. I will have a conversation with somebody, and they will say, "Well, at that point in the process, this person does that, and then they check it against this thing, and then it's fine, right?" And it's like, okay, I mean, let's multiply that times 250 deals a year, and let's talk about like what the actual costs in terms of like velocity and salary and opportunity and error rate and whatever training if that person leaves uh, it is missed, right? And an experienced sales rep will have um, you know experiences built on things going poorly, right? For everybody, that's not just sales. So they will have seen and heard those scenarios and can say, "Oh, right, yeah. So like you are solving this problem probably by X, or in this case, you would have to do this other thing, right? Like that would be part of your process." And the prospect feels seen, and then you can speak to like, well, look, if you're solving it that way manually, then you know here's how it would work, so I can help you see what that looks like, overcome the like unknown, and then contextualize like, look, if I can get you 5% farther down the road because my product's a little bit better, how much of that, those like invisible or like kind of shuffled around shell game costs and risks can we eliminate, right? The That kind of stuff. If you don't recognize it and can't surface it to people, the only way to do it is to have like lost 50 deals over your career to those kinds of challenges, or you're just making stuff up so the prospect knows that you have no idea, right, what their world is like.
Yeah,
All right. So, of course, whoops. Um, Once you are working the deal, you're either going to win it or not, right? But the whole reason we want to collect our indirect competitors on the deal is so that we can figure out how we're doing, right?
visibility.
If it's not measurable, then what's the point? Um, there's a lot of different reports that you can put together here, but these are some descriptions of the ones I have. I have some I would love to show, but I am not going to show client data publicly. These are the ones that have every organization has a little bit different kind of when they see the report, they have the different ahas, but these are the ones with indirect competitors that over the times that I've done this kind of get the most kind of positive reaction, and like I had no idea this was possible. Um, so if you win a deal, with an indirect competitor, what you want to know is uh, this you want to know your revenue impact, your deal impact, and how you're doing with each of those kind of indirect competitors or categories. So I set up a pie graph of revenue um, by indirect competitor against competitors, right? So, like a named competitor is part of the deal, or an indirect competitor is part of the deal. Um, the My gut feeling, um, I don't have enough data to like make this a TED talk, but if that indirect competitor wedge is more than 10%, then you're massively underserving your audience, and you're probably missing a ton of revenue. The And also, probably you're not getting at bats uh, top of funnel, right? So it means there's a ton of people out there that have your problem, but can't find you. They don't know to look for you, even though you would be a good solution for them, and that's how you grow your customer base, right? So make a pie graph of like, whatever, $250,000 were indirect. The rest of the pie was direct. You kind of now know like what your current scope is, and can say like, well, if we can grow that, you know, by 15%, you can start to kind of think about revenue impact, right? Um, the next one is just like how many deals, right? By indirect competitor. The our form had an example. I'll just pull up another form. Why not?
Yeah. And
Form
if you're the
builder.
HubSpot owner and you have any trouble getting, buy-in from leadership or the finance team, like they want this information
Yeah,
like so badly.
right,
And like these things that we can ask for on the front end, there's often no place for them in the back office systems. So it's if you have it, it's super manual, right? And this is what brings everything into spreadsheets and PowerPoint decks. And
right,
just like we have all these one-on-one conversations to get the data. It is just such a quick path towards getting more buy-in for using HubSpot to help the business understand what's happening.
right. And yeah, it's building a case, getting consensus around kind of how much bandwidth can you invest in doing these things, right? So like, here's another a sample form of how we might uh, ask in a this is in a B2B example, but this is our a physical trainer example, right? Like, do you own any of these? In Just to reiterate that how we ask the question, right? It's expose checkboxes, so it's not like click a list and then choose. Could be one or more, but this is a great example. Anywhere you can do this when you're asking questions like this, where you're actually kind of like um, where you're overloading the question. So a physical trainer wants to know this both because they want to know, like, or not both. There's many reasons. What have you failed at in the past? What are some areas where I can ask you to do this kind of work, right? If I know you have a treadmill at home, it's like, okay, that I'm kind of going in primed for the kinds of things that we might build into your plan. Um, as well as like uh, if they don't choose me, what are they going to do instead? Well, they choose like gym membership. um, that's just a I'm just mentioning that in passing, but like we've got four identified indirect competitors here. So our report, even if it's B2B, doesn't have to be a personal trainer. um, we have a pie graph of like, okay, the folks that we won who are indirect competitors, which of those indirect competitors is the most common, right? Like, and you generally see a long tail distribution here. If you're in software, the biggest wedge is going to be, almost certainly going to be spreadsheets. Um, but which of those indirect competitors offer us the biggest opportunity, right? So we now know like what is our current revenue, which one of those should we focus on if we're going to focus on one? And then a win rate by indirect competitor as a table, right? So like free weights, treadmill, running machine, gym membership. What's our actual win rate, right? Like when those deals come through and we've identified them, how effective are we at winning them? Which feeds back into our research process of using AI to listen to our calls, checking with our sales team, doing an analysis project on those deals, right? Those three pies can put, put those on the screen, and you can have a really effective 15-minute conversation about what the upside of investing in the marketing and sales enablement for these indirect competitors are. And if all of those things are really small, then maybe you are not right now able to get in front of enough prospects and opportunities that have indirect competitors, and so it's not worth investing in, right? And that's, to your point, why it's so effective. This is what leadership teams want to see. um, it's like, okay, yeah, we know that there's these indirect competitors, but like, how do we know if we should focus on it, right? Well, all we did was put one field on a form and then use a workflow that when the deal gets created, we pass a value to it. And now we have all of this data, right? It took us all of 17 minutes to build that. Um,
Yeah. In this layer, even if we can get our team starting to think in this context, because this gives me an idea to maybe finally I'm ready to feed into the post sales conversation. Um, because like we're stopping at closed here, but for anybody out there like
uh,
feeling
for now, we have a little bit more to add to this.
okay, uh, I'll let you go then
No,
because
go ahead. I,
um there's costs, right? There's so many hidden costs to selling the wrong product to the wrong fit customers, right? And like that, even that trainer example, um, like maybe you're giving away a free treadmill or something, and that's a cost of sale that you're choosing to do. And they have a great treadmill at home, and you didn't even need to offer that, and you could have gotten the sale like much cheaper for the cost of delivery. Like that's a very crude example, but there's so many businesses I've seen and heard of that feel handcuffed to like their breadwinning customer that they just know they are so costly to serve, and like they make you go through all these hoops, and but you can't necessarily figure out why. This is a path to starting to figure that out and then adjust processes to support like these indirect competitors.
yeah. The We're going to talk about post sale here a little bit, not a ton, to save time. So we can definitely come back to it. But you're absolutely right about that. The Before I advance to talk about closed lost, of there's a lot of analysis and stuff you can do on closed lost with indirect competitors. But at the very least, the make it a little bigger here. Also, just to mention in passing, everybody uh, a rite of passage for sales and marketing or admins or ops people who work in Sales and Marketing Hub is to create a drop down list of closed loss reasons for deals rather than relying on the default free text field. So do that if you haven't. But collecting closed lost reasons against indirect competitors. Um, this is an important dimension for analysis as you are identifying new ones. But just throw a pie together and say, like, look, we have a pie that says here's what our revenue impact looks like right now. Like if we drop the ball on these, here's how much revenue goes away. If we think we could increase the win rate, then here's how much our revenue stands to improve. Here's uh, here's like how big the slice of the pie is. This graph in that conversation tells you like, okay, well, our big slice of of indirect competitors, our biggest opportunity where we're doing well. Here's why we lose them, right? And you want to have the discipline. Most teams just always choose price
I
for a
was gonna
reason,
say
and it's
that.
never price. I generally try to fight to not have price be on close lost reason because it's never price. It's always price is all if price is cited, it's 99% of the time it's a red herring.
Yeah.
But if again, like whatever, Spreadsheets is your main competitor and is your main indirect competitor, and the close lost is no decision, then you know what to do, like for follow-up marketing for those folks. But also it's like, okay, their pain wasn't bad enough probably,
Hmm.
right? So the value between Spreadsheets and us is is really narrow. It's not huge, right? And so then again, do some analysis of those sales calls and conversations and figure that out. But that helps you contextualize, like, is this a messaging and positioning or a sales problem, or do we need to drill in and see, like, okay, we actually have a product problem here, so we shouldn't be focusing on these indirect competitors, or product opportunity it wouldn't be a problem. um, so and then of course I'll pull up the rest of the post sale here for time, but whoops, the if you have a complex onboarding, right? If you're not just a one and done purchase, uh, the your call recordings are going to tell you, as well as conversations, the plans that you build, um, what when you are getting a customer up and running, what your inputs are going to be, what those indirect competitors, what their broken processes and whatnot are, but also like what the win criteria for that onboarding project need to be, right? Um, which you can use to, when you have a recognized indirect competitor, build out templatized, processes or plans that recognize how their expectations and their problem framing are different, right? Like, we need to, when you get to this stage, all like data migration, for example, technology product context, uh, all data migration starts to look the same, but a data migration from one ERP to another or one quoting system to another looks a lot different than a migration from a spreadsheet into an existing system, right? Like the data model mapping and all of that stuff is different. And particularly like um, the again, like the indirect competitors signal a different way of thinking about how they reach that goal. So you need to make sure that those are the checkpoints you're hitting uh, as you bring people through that process to bring them into the successful framing that your product requires, right? So another way to say this is recognize where they're at when they start onboarding, and don't just treat them like everybody else when we know for a fact their situation is different from your typical customer, right?
Yeah.
When you don't do that, that's how you drop the ball in an onboarding process. Um, and uh, let's talk about one other form really quick. The Finding new use cases, indirect. This is where you discover that you are the indirect competitor for somebody else, and how that allows you to run the same plan to identify new use cases and sell to a different market or expand your existing footprint within a business. And so, another place to ask or pass this data in, if you have it, is during like research support, customer success context. So if you are familiar, if anyone is familiar, um, Loom is a good example of doing this. If you are a Loom user, you may have seen that they have a um, let's call it a feature that they where you record a process with a screen share and talk through it, and they will turn that into an SOP document, right? Um, that's not a feature that Loom had before, but that is that makes them an indirect competitor to like an LMS or a dedicated tool for like training and onboarding. It makes them an indirect competitor to dumping all your processes into Word files and never updating them and just emailing them when somebody says what your process is and nobody fills them. Um, but asking a question like this in a support or just any part of your post purchase flow exposes information like that about your existing customers. And this is where we close the loop back to how we can identify new use cases and opportunities, right? So, like just knowing, hey, what are you using? This combination of questions would give you everything you know to find existing use cases where you would be an indirect competitor. You can expand. What are you using the system for? And in this case, like, what are your subjects, right? So, like, that example would be like, I'm using a permanent video for repository for, my operations process. For example, if you can get answers like this from your customers, um, you only need to get a handful of these kinds of responses in order to, over here, identify those use cases. Like, okay, a bunch of people are building SOPs. Is our product good enough for that yet? Does that present us with an opportunity? And do we need to do anything in order to make that even better so that we can um, position an upsell, an add-on, an expansion, or something, right? So like that is how we identify like new features or products or services, and identifying that use case gives us the ability to go out into the marketing channel and say, hey, uh, documenting process is a pain in the butt. You know that you never do it, but what if instead of trying to sit down with a blank slate and write uh, a business technical language friendly multi-step process with nested steps and screenshots. You just record the video, we do that for you, and then they are both right there for us to reuse. Well, we can go way back here and start to use it for, this would be the first step, is tailoring it for your existing audiences, but you would also take it all the way back into your content marketing and whatnot.
Yes.
So
This supports almost any cross sell, upsell goal I've ever seen in my life.
yeah.
Like so often there is expansion just sitting there,
Yes.
like waiting to go to these customers, and you don't ask these questions, you don't find these other ways that they're doing things. And it's funny because as soon as you let them know, they're like, oh wow. Like, yeah, of course I'm gonna give you this extra money so you can do that. Like,
Right.
uh,
Right.
so
And or,
visibility.
like the cross sell upsell is absolutely, and depend a lot of this depends on your product maturity, but if you just, you grab your pro plan users and just be like, "Hey, we just added this killer new feature." And you're like, "That's what I was trying to do with Loom. This is amazing." Right? Like your CSAT is going to,
Yeah.
big spike there,
Usage,
right?
adoption, value creation.
Yeah, we and this is not a solution for today, but we so often we silo those things, like, right? We put that into the product org and we disconnect it from sales and marketing, right? And we treat it like, oh, product came up with an idea by talking to customers, and so like here's the marketing story, right? And a lot of times, like that marketing story, I'm pointing at the wrong the wrong screen. Sorry. The that story is actually already here, and we just haven't done this
Asked.
work and passed it all the way through, right? And then pick it up here and here, right? Like if we identify that all the way through, uh, we're 18 months faster on those insights, right? Because we don't have to wait for it to emerge.
Yes,
That's
sir.
that's why this is so exciting, right? Why? enjoy it. So we didn't step through like because this is actually it's more strategically heavy and technically implementation light. We didn't step through that, but as you know, as I said a couple of times, all we needed to do was a question, ideally formatted as multiple check boxes. Your internal values can be whatever, but just like super friendly, approachable, low friction language that you put in a high value conversion experience. Save that as a property on the contact and smart lists, and you've already like you're a huge step ahead of your competitors doing this.
And that is how you build audience profiles in HubSpot.
It is.
Thanks so much, Josh. We'll see you next
Thank
time.
you. See you next time. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get us a 30-minute show at some point.